The year is 1965. The place, Green Haven State Prison in upstate New York. Three men, one from Brooklyn, one from the Bronx, and one from Harlem, are becoming unexpected friends. The three guys are Matthew Madonna, Joey Gallo, and Nicky Barnes. And this is where Nicky Barnes went on to be the first, for sure, black criminal superstar in America. This is where he made his big connection. Him and Joe Gallo and Matty Madonna talked a lot, and he learned the heroin business from the perspective of the Italians, and when he got out, Matthew Madonna started serving him. And by the late 60s, Nicky Barnes' name was on everybody's lips in Harlem, and pretty soon, all around the country, at least as far as the black underworld went. And Nicky Barnes made the cover of the New Yorker magazine. He became the subject of the Attorney General of the United States' negative attention. Rudy Giuliani went on to participate in his prosecution and also trying to help him get out of prison early. So Will Smith is finishing up shooting a series called The Council for Netflix on Nicky Barnes, and he's a fascinating entree into a very unique time and place, which was Harlem in the 1970s and late 60s, and its melange of Italian, black, and Puerto Rican and Cuban underworld figures. So here's an overview of Nicky Barnes and what went on in his infamous career.
Should Nicky Barnes go free? Leroy Nicky Barnes, who for 7 years in the 1970s was godfather of the largest and most profitable heroin-selling operation in the history of New York City.
I knew Nicky. As the kids say today, Nicky had the bag. He had the bag.
Tavario's mother was just one notch in the food chain, kind of below Nicky Barnes in the Harlem underworld.
Between 1973 and 79, when Barnes operated, more than 2,100 people died in New York City alone from drug overdose. And according to the DEA, most of those deaths were caused by heroin supplied by Barnes' organization. Between 1973 and 77, Barnes was arrested variously for homicide, bribery, drug dealing, and gun possession, but none of the charges stuck. He became a Harlem legend and very rich, and whatever he had, he flaunted.
My name is Louis Diaz. I'm a retired DEA special agent. I worked for DEA for approximately 28 years. All I heard at that time was that he was a major player and that he was a major target of the Unified Intelligence Division of the NYPD, New York Police Department, and that they nicknamed an operation behind him as Operation Slick. So they were on him for a while now, but they just couldn't get enough on him. Nicky's situation was brought to my attention through an informant, Robert Geronimo.
Leroy Barnes was himself one of the most compelling characters of the era. He'd risen up from being a Harlem heroin addict in the late 50s to being the undisputed king of drugs in Harlem, courtesy of his Italian suppliers. When 60 Minutes interviewed him in the mid-'80s about his work as an informant, he gave a very insightful analysis of his own life and times in the age of white powder and black power.
I was overwhelmed by guilt. I had every reason to testify against them and no reason at all to feel guilty. But it's that street corner indoctrination, that criminal ethic, that street corner value system, it's overpowering.
Barnes testified about his secret 7-member drug council composed of the most successful black heroin dealers in New York. According to Barnes, they shared an oath of brotherhood and loyalty to one another.
To treat my brother as I treat myself. Mystical dynamic present when we said it.
You ever kill anybody?
No.
Had other people do it for you?
I guess that would best describe it, yeah.
Matter of fact, it came up, we discovered that there was a police officer involved, Richard Smith, out of the 40th Precinct, and he was married to Guy Fisher's sister. and he was their prime source of intelligence when it came to investigating guys that they thought were informants or undercover agents or whatever the case might be. However, I was fortunate enough that they never asked him about me.
But the Nicky Barnes case, I actually went undercover with Louis Diaz to launder money, and it was a pretty hairy moment. An after-hours joint in Harlem, and I was going to deliver the laundered cash to the Nicky Barnes organization. You give me $10 million in 10s, 1s, 5s, I'll give you back in stacks of 100s. Officers, Louis Diaz needs somebody to deliver the, you got to go up to Chez Joey. This is an after-hours club owned by Nicky Barnes. Bad. This is what you call a bucket of blood. Yeah, you're gonna have homicides there, all the time. So I show up, and I've got this suitcase full of money. I had to park on the street in Harlem, walk about a half a block to this place, and it was intense. It was intense, really intense in my own head, because I understood this is how you die. You think nothing can happen, but this is how you die, because I don't know who knows I'm there with that. In the appeal, they called me, his men called me the mule, and they thought I was the scariest fucking guy. It's in the appeal.
Nicky controlled all the 5 boroughs of New York City. He also ran up the Eastern Seaboard, actually as far as up into Canada. Nicky was the most prolific, biggest dope dealer in the United States during that period of time. Forget about Frank Lucas and all these other guys that were touted to be big dealers. Nicky was the man. He was the Al Capone of Harlem. During the course of the investigation, I had 13 agents that were working with me on that case. Another major component would be surveillance, putting things together, following guys here and there, teaming them up with other guys that would add to the conspiracy, things of that sort. How are you going to get 2 white guys to work in Harlem? This was the 70s. But I came up with the idea, and I said, listen, well, you know what? How would they think? They would think a black guy would be more reasonable to work in Harlem, don't you think? They would never. I don't think they would ever suspect white guys to be working in Harlem, and we went with that that thought. So anyway, I came up with the scenario that I was Geronimo's cousin, and I was pretty much a renegade mob guy. I would do freelance work for the various families, but there came a time when I got a little too hot, and I was looking to establish myself again in the narcotic business. That's when I got involved with my cousin again, Robert Geronimo, because he had connections in the drug trade. So Geronimo then would introduce me. The plan was for Geronimo to introduce me to players in that particular business. So the first thing we did was he introduced me to Wally Fisher. Wally Fisher was the brother of Guy Fisher, who was Nicky Barnes' right-hand man.
Was there a drug council?
Oh, the drug council is a myth. It's the first time I heard of council was when I was in court in 1983.
Guy Fisher, who had a brief affair with Barnes' former girlfriend, Shemeka, was a member of that 7-man drug council, according to Barnes. Fisher is now serving life without parole after Barnes testified against him.
You mean to tell me that you can give someone a life plus sentence because you say he had sex with my girlfriend?
And he's putting people behind bars, helping to make cases for the feds.
There is no justice in terms of that. Ah, man. 8 years ago, Nick was the scum of the earth in terms of court, being in the courtroom in Judge Worker's court. And then 3 years ago, he became Robin Hood because he was telling. It's really sad, I'm laughing, but it's sad.
Through Wally, he made various introductions to various people who were members of the Barnes organizations, and that's how we started to gather intelligence and information and further the undercover investigation, whereby eventually we would get Nicky.
He paid his street sellers not in money, but in heroin. And since many of them were addicts, that ensured an active and loyal sales force. But in 1977, Barnes, who had been arrested 13 times on various charges but never convicted, was indicted once again. What was his reaction to this latest indictment? He posed for the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine. They called him Mr. Untouchable.
In 1977, Nicky Barnes became the most infamous black drug kingpin of all time by allowing himself to be photographed staring smugly into the camera with his nickname, Mr. Untouchable, written below.
Leroy Nicky Barnes was perhaps Harlem's and one of the country's biggest drug dealers. He sported the fur coats and fancy cars that marked his success. At 45, he was known as the Untouchable because the law couldn't seem to lay a hand on him. But today, he was sentenced to life in prison, presumably now stripped of his hero's garb in the underworld.
Hollywood made him, and media made him much bigger than he really was. He was big compared to other thugs, but basically he was just one of a guy. He was the flavor of the hour, you know, for media. Nicky Barnes, Mr. Untouchable. Wow, holy shit! The fact is, he was just one of many.
It's interesting. Cavario is someone who is probably one of the very few people alive who interacted with both Nicky Barnes and Big Meech, our own #1 black criminal celebrity of this most recent era. And the way he did that was that Cavario's mother was just one notch in the food chain, kind of below Nicky Barnes in the Harlem underworld.
Yeah, he got on the cover of the New York Times magazine. I remember when it happened, and my mother was like, "Oh, this motherfucker done lost his mind." Like, she was upset. When Nicky was, running around in the streets, it was taboo to move outside of the space doing your, I'm the man thing. I'm flashy, this, that, and the other. It was taboo. You didn't do it. You didn't do that, You stayed within the space where we all knew what it was, and like that there. Like, obviously they went and Nicky and them, they traveled to other places, whatever, and they did it like big rich niggas do it. 250 people on a plane flying into another country, and he had the money.
Nicky Barnes was perhaps Harlem's and one of the country's biggest drug dealers. He was known as the Untouchable because the law couldn't seem to lay a hand on him. But today, he was sentenced to life in prison.
He's going to always be respected unless there's a real significant shift in our community. Because if we shift, if we suddenly start not accepting drug dealers as people to be respected because they made, and it's really because of the money. Just imagine if there was only the destruction,
and without the money.
How would people really feel?
From prison, Barnes would call his former friends on the street collect, and through them he was able to have Thelma Grant followed 24 hours a day. The trail soon led to a drug dealer named Tito Johnson.
So I called one of my buddies, and he said, yeah, he said, Nick, he said, yeah, she was on 7th Avenue. In your Mercedes, in your white Mercedes. And he said, I didn't even see him. They called me to the car. He said, Tito called me to the car because he wanted me to see that he had your woman. And Tito was driving my cars. He never had a foreign car. He was a Buick Oldsmobile man.
And that began to eat on you.
Yeah.
And that eventually led to that call to Bill Tendy.
Yeah.
Tell me what it is you have in mind.
They were public friends of mine that were supposed to be doing things for me,
Yeah.
And well, they're doing things against me, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no way to reach out to get to them, and I want to get back at them, really.
Mm-hmm.
That's my primary reason.
Were you surprised that he was going to do it?
I was surprised that a person like Nicky Barnes would do it, but when I ultimately found out the reason why he was doing these things, it made sense to me.
How important was the information?
I think it was terribly important.
In that?
I think it was terribly important because it resulted in the conviction of Barnes as the hardcore of Barnes' entire operation.
So Nicky Barnes gets life, no parole in prison. And a few years pass, and he's still directing traffic from jail, and then something happens that caused him to want to become an informant and kind of bring down the whole Harlem underworld he helped create in the first place. And he claims it was because people were messing with his girlfriends. Now, one part he leaves out when he tells his own story is that the girl he had on the side, Shemeka, she was killed while standing in a bar in Harlem by 2 white men who walked in and shot her in the head.
Nicky Barnes turned government informant and began to tell all he knew. There are those in government who say he should be pardoned. Among the people he informed on were his former drug colleagues and his women. How did he feel testifying against them?
I was overwhelmed by guilt. I was overwhelmed by guilt. I had every reason to testify against them and no reason at all to feel guilty. But it's that street corner indoctrination, that criminal ethic, that street corner value system. It's overpowering. And I started crying on the stand.
From guilt.
Yeah.
And emotion.
And emotion. I couldn't talk.
Barnes testified about his secret 7-member drug council composed of the most successful black heroin dealers in New York. Though Barnes says now he began to talk against his former drug associates like Fisher out of a motive of revenge, it soon became apparent that freedom was mostly on his mind. And since Barnes knew he could only be released through a presidential pardon, he understood that the government wanted more from him. So he testified before the President's Commission on Organized Crime, wearing a hood, telling the commission about drug operations in New York. And Barnes began to snitch on his fellow inmates as well. Inside prison, Barnes learned about illegal activities that he described to prison authorities.
I'm a bookmaker, and right now on camera I want to lay you 9 to 5 that Nicky Barnes, Leroy Barnes, gets out of jail.
New York gangster Herbie Sperling spoke with Barnes when they were in prison together in New York, and they worked out a drug deal at Barnes' suggestion that eventually resulted in the conviction of Sperling's son.
I'm doing the same sentence that Nicky Barnes was doing.
Life without parole.
Without parole. I've got it the longest in the country. It's worse than a death sentence. A death sentence, you're dead and life goes on. Here you linger, and sometimes people get depressed. Now, some people get so depressed that they decide to make up a story.
You think he's going to get out?
There's no doubt in my mind. The government has to let him out. This is part of their propaganda ploy. What they're saying is anybody that wants to get out, just make up stories about a lot of people. We got plenty of room. We got a lot of prisons. We'll replace them with you and we'll let you out. No matter what you did, no matter what you do.
He's a girl. He's a fag. He's a punk.
So what kind of thing?
In fact, I shouldn't say he's a punk and a fag because I'm insulting punks and fags.
Guy Fisher made the mistake of fooling around with one of Nicky Barnes' girls, and this gave at least the justification to Nicky to bring down his former friends. Though, in reality, you know, a guy that rises that high in the food chain of crime like Nicky for such a long period of time has to be a true sociopath and really can feel no empathy for others.
You know, Nicky lost it all. He lost it all. He lost the power, the fame, the money, he lost it all. The respect, he lost it all.
Barnes was a bad guy. Barnes has gone through a metamorphosis. If they made the rules that someone should benefit by becoming an informant, no one has done more, no one has created more cases, no one has put more people in jail, and has done it with a degree of integrity and with a degree of honesty from what I read.
Is Nicky Barnes going to spend the rest of his life in prison?
If the government doesn't cut him loose, I think they're crazy. There's no reason. He's played their game by their rules. He fought them, now he joined them.
For Barnes' cooperation, he has now gained many supporters in the Justice Department who want to see him eventually released. One of those is Rudolph Giuliani, now U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, whose office prosecuted most of the cases that resulted from Barnes' testimony. We talked to Giuliani in front of Jagazzi's in Harlem, a former Barnes hangout.
I think he should be given credit for his having cooperated with the government to encourage others to come forward and cooperate and bust up these operations. Essentially what should happen with him, in my view, is at some point he should be permitted to be released from prison at some point.
We talked to old pals of his who are now in Lewisburg prison. They said, listen, he's a snitch. He'll be on the street in no time. They really believe that the only reason that he did it was not because he got religion, but because he wants to get on the street and that you're going to help him do just that.
I think that the realistic situation here has to be that when people turn in, organizations like this account for 50 people being convicted. Everyone he's testified against has been convicted and their cases have been upheld on appeal. There has to be some reward for that. That's the only way we can combat this kind of activity.
And he played the cards he was dealt very well from his own perspective, because in the end he only did 22 years in prison, where people like Guy Fisher did a lot more time. In fact, Guy Fisher just got out.